Welcome to Lecture 3. In the last lecture, we talked about assessment methods and figuring out the reasons behind clients' mental health problems. But what do we do next? In this lecture, we are going to talk about psychotherapy in general, and we are going to focus on what makes psychotherapy work. In the last lecture, I mentioned APA's definition of evidence-based practice in psychology. It is the integration of the best available research with clinical expertise in the context of the patient's characteristics, values, and preferences. It is often described as a three-legged stool. If you take any one of these pieces away, the stool falls down. Last time we talked in detail about therapist judgment, so today we will focus a little more on the other two. Let's start with the research. The research examining effective treatments for mental health problems is very important. Without the research, therapists often can mistakenly judge that the treatments that they are doing are effective. Even with the research, researchers often mistakenly assert that their studies show a treatment is effective, when the study can't actually support that. In this article, again by Scott Lilienfeld and colleagues, they reviewed different reasons why therapists and researchers make mistakes in their claims. They identified three main categories for the mistakes that are often made, and you can see each of those in the different boxes on this slide. Within those three categories are 26 different errors that are often made, and in the article, Lilienfeld gives suggestions for ways to avoid those areas. But what I want to focus on is what underlies each of the mistakes. In the article, Lilienfeld discussed 4 different cognitive errors that have particular relevance to evaluating treatments. The first is naive realism. This is the idea that what you see is all there is. But this is a big mistake. Our perceptions can often deceive us. And even if they are accurate, there's so much to the picture of mental health that we just miss or can't see. We see this a lot with case examples and testimonials. We may hear about a treatment working for one individual, and so we assume it must be effective. Or as a therapist, we may see it work for some of our clients, and we assume that it must be effective for all. What we miss is that there may be way better treatments out there, or other things that we don't know about besides the treatment that are actually causing the change. In the paper, as talking about this error, they mentioned the logical error known as post hoc ergo propter hoc, which corresponds to the idea that change following a specific treatment is not equivalent to change because of that treatment. The second cognitive error is confirmation bias. This is the idea that once we make up our mind on something, we seek out and pay attention to all of the evidence for that thing and ignore all of the evidence against it. Confirmation bias can actually be good for some things. For example, once you are in a committed relationship with someone, it is a great thing to pay attention to all of the things that support how great they are and how much you love them, and that you made the right choice in being in a relationship with them. And it's a good thing to be blind to all of the little mistakes they make or shortcomings they might have. But that is not true for therapy. A therapist should never decide that a particular treatment is the right one for everyone. That puts them at risk of ignoring all of the evidence that might go against it. The next cognitive error is the illusory causation. This is the idea that we often see causal relationships between things, when a correlational relationship is all that really exists. This goes back to the idea that we may see clients recover from a treatment, but it may not be the case that the treatment actually caused the change. It may actually be due to events that occur out of the session and placebo effects. The final cognitive error that Lilienfeld discussed is the illusion of control. That is, we often overestimate our ability to influence events. He shares that, for example, when money is at stake, most people prefer to select a lottery ticket themselves, rather than leave someone else to select it for them. They also prefer to roll a die themselves, rather than have the outcome be based on someone else's roll. The odds don't actually change, but people feel like they do. Applied to therapy, when therapists work extensively with clients, they are automatically set up to see the clients as getting better. This ties back in to another finding from the previous lecture, where the therapist way overestimated the number of clients who recovered and underestimated the number who had stayed the same or gotten worse. So it is very important that we look at the actual research when deciding what works in therapy. So what does the actual research say? What causes change in psychotherapy? This is a pie chart of the research evidence for different therapy ingredients. Michael Lambert out of Brigham Young University put this forth. From this, we see that 40% of client change is due to things that happen outside of the therapy room. Perhaps things start to get better at work, or the client enters a very positive relationship. Another 30% of the change is due to the therapeutic relationship. This is the bond between the client and the therapist, and their ability to work together in treatment. 15% is then explained by the client's expectations for treatment or work. And the final 15% is due to the actual treatment itself, the specific intervention that is used. And some would say that that last number is an overestimate, that if we take out all of the bad treatments and only think about the bona fide ones, the ones that have strong theoretical empirical support to them, then there really isn't any variance between interventions, and the specific treatment choice doesn't at all explain whether or not the client will get better. So what we are left with are the variables that the field calls common factors. These are the things that are present in all types of treatments. Carl Rogers was the first one to really discuss the idea of common factors. In a paper published in 1957, he suggested that there are 6 things that are necessary and sufficient to cause change in psychotherapy. Necessary in that they have to be present in order for change to occur, and sufficient in that nothing else is needed. If the therapist does these 6 things and does them well, then that is all that is needed for the client to get better. So what were the 6 things? First is that 2 people have to be in psychological contact. It has to be a relationship where both believe what is done can help the individual. Second, the client has to be in a state of incongruence, a state where there is some conflict in them between who they believe they are and who they believe they should be. Third, the therapist has to be in a state of congruence. They can be genuine, and there is a match between who they are and who they feel they should be. Now, this is a tall order for anyone. Fortunately, the therapist doesn't need to be 100% congruent all of the time. Instead, it is just while they are helping the client in therapy. Fourth, the therapist has to experience unconditional positive regard for the client. This is a valuing of the client, no matter who they are or what they've done. You don't have to like or agree with the client's choices, but you have to value them as a human being. The fifth condition is the therapist experience of an empathetic understanding of the client. That is, they're able to see the world from the client's view and are really able to understand the client's unique experiences. The last condition is what the therapist is able to effectively communicate to the client. Are they able to effectively express that empathetic understanding in a way that the client will hear and feel it? Carl Rogers suggested that if those conditions are present, then the client will get better. And the degree of recovery depends on the degree to which those conditions are there. So as a therapist, you don't have to be perfect with all of these conditions, but the better you get at them, the more likely your clients will recover. So what do you think? Would you say that all of these conditions are necessary for psychotherapy to work? Would you say that they are sufficient? Or do you think anything is missing? If so, what would you add to the list?